Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Monday, May 20th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about what we've been up to at the water cooler. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta. And joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writers Hoai-Tran.
Hey, everyone.
And Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
See, now when you're doing your intros, we had a reader send in a t-shirt idea that had, like, our intros in line with, I guess, location-based. So I was the Hollywood sign. Jacob was downtown Austin's Capitol building. And Chris is now was Rocky. And now every time he says that, I'm just going to see Rocky.
Oh, no.
With the fist pump and everything.
Yeah. Anyways, it was really cool. I shared it with the whole team. Maybe I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But let's get into the water cooler. Let's talk about what we've been doing. This weekend, I went to the Renaissance Pleasure Faire, which is in Southern California, and it's a Renaissance fair. It's actually the first Renaissance fair ever in the United States. I think it was created in the early 1960s. And has been going strong. It's one of the biggest I've ever seen. It's one of the most elaborate. Like when we were there yesterday, there was just so many people in costume and in character. And I videotaped it for a future vlog on the Ordinary Adventures channel. So look forward to that. I found there's lots of booths selling like nonsense. Like you can buy like Jack's Magical Beans for $15 or whatever. And there was like a couple booths that actually were selling magic wands. And I've never actually wanted to own a magic wand. I have a magic wand from the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. And as a magician, I've always like kind of brushed aside the use of magic wands because like there is a good practical use for a magic wand in traditional magic. Like it's good for misdirection and stuff. But to me, it always comes off as kind of like old school magic that like I kind of like people I think see and they're like, I don't want to watch that. So I've never gotten into magic wands, but I came across, there was a booth that was selling magic wands that were themed as Star Wars lightsabers. So I bought a green lightsaber magic wand, which I will try to put into my act in some way. Although I feel like introducing that kind of prop, then you got to explain why you're using a lightsaber as a magic wand, and then it takes like a minute out of your routine. So I don't know. I'll figure it out. Jacob, you seem like the type that would go and enjoy a Ren Fair.
Every single year, I talk about going to the Ren Fair with my wife. Every single year, we say, yeah, let's do it. And every year, we never do. So maybe. I don't know.
Does anybody here go to Ren Fairs?
I've been to one once before. It was a lot of fun.
Did you dress up?
It's a date drink. I did not. I just bought a flower crown and put my head through like a sock and drank a lot.
I mean, I guess that's the purpose of Ren Fair anyways.
Yep.
Yeah, that and watching the jousting and we saw a bird show where like these like hawks like came like within inches of my head flying, from the stage to the back of the outdoor auditorium. It was great. The other cool thing I did this week is I was invited to the world premiere of John Wick 3, and I was invited by TCL, the company that owns the naming rights for the Chinese Theatre, the famous Mann's Chinese Theatre. They don't own the Chinese Theatre, but they own the naming rights. And I thought I was just going to the world premiere, and this is the U.S. premiere. And this is like the day before I was hitting theaters. I didn't think it was going to be anything special, but and not to say that going to a world premiere is not special, but I thought it was going to be I go to a bunch of world premieres every year. I thought it was going to be the same thing, the typical premiere experience. And it was different because I was actually invited by the guys at TCL to sit in their private box. There's two private boxes on top of the Chinese Theater. One is for the people who own the theater, and I think they have 4 seats. And then the TCL has like 8 or 10 seats in another box. And then there's actually a couple other boxes. If you're looking from the ground floor, there's a couple other boxes that aren't actually real. They're just, facades. But it was a really cool experience. They have like a whole VIP lounge there with like a bar, and I mean, you are kind of above the normal viewing area, so you're like, you can't really lean back as much. You're kind of like looking down towards the screen, and it's interesting also because you're like closer to the ceiling, so you see those like Dolby Atmos theaters hanging from the ceiling. People that have been to the theater in LA, I've gotten tons of questions of like, does it sound any better from up there? No, it doesn't. The Chinese theater is an old theater and has a little bit of a problem with echo. They've tried to fix it over the years, but there's not much you can do to like a historical, site. Like you can't really, soundproof like the walls and stuff like that. So it sounds the same. It was an incredible experience. I was so happy to be invited up there, and I hope maybe someday I can go back. But that's what I've been up to, and apparently no one else has been doing things this week because I have the only entry here. So let's talk about those of you who have been reading things. So Jacob, you haven't been doing things, but you've been reading.
Yeah, I've been poking through the Amusement Park, 900 Years of Thrills and Spills and the Dreamers and Schemers Who Built Them by Stephen M. Silverman, who has a long list of books about the entertainment industry to his name. And this book was recommended to me by Slash Film contributor Josh Spiegel, who writes our theme park bits column. And as the name implies, this book is the history of the amusement industry, starting in 1100s Europe with the pleasure gardens of England and France, going all the way up to the wizarding world of Harry Potter and Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. It is this in-depth, beautifully made book full of tons of photographs, lots of art, lots of old school drawings from, centuries past of the first amusement parks, the first roller coasters, the stuff that was seen as thrill rides, 300 years ago, like bobsleds. And it is an incredibly fascinating book. If you're interested at all in theme parks, amusement parks, the industry and how it essentially was grown out of, hucksters trying to make a buck to being a multi-billion-dollar, industry that is all about pushing the boundaries of technology, and from major corporations. It is probably the definitive, amusement park history book that I've seen, and I'm really enjoying it. And Amazon has it for a really good price, and it's an oversized book. I think it's $35 normally. I got it for $22 on Amazon, and it feels like a bargain. It's a beautiful thing. And Peter, I think you should read this for sure.
Okay, Jacob, I have some questions for you because I know you and me, above everyone else here, love to read and listen. Like we listen to Jim Hill's podcast, like we read the latest, blog posts on, all the Disney sites and stuff. Is there a lot to learn here, or is it like just a great recap of the history of amusement parks?
Well, I haven't gotten to the stuff I'm mostly familiar with, which is, back half of 20th century. But this book, like I said, it starts off nearly 1,000 years ago, and this is also new to me. It tries to understand how pleasure parks for people with the idea of a vacation was taking a stroll around a lake evolved into the wizarding world of Harry Potter. So it is just I'm learning a lot about the early days of this industry as opposed to how Disneyland was built, because everybody has written a book about how Disneyland was built. So I don't know if that will cover familiar material or not. I'm assuming it will. But I'm really reinvigorated by the early stuff that I'm in right here so far, which is the kernel of it. Like it's the equivalent of saying, in order to get to Avengers Endgame, let's look at Thomas Edison filming, 30-second shorts in the 1890s. That's what it feels like, except it goes back even further.
Well, cool. I might have to check this out myself. HT, now that you are done with Dune, what have you been reading?
I've been on a bit of a high fantasy kick after finishing Dune. I picked up a copy of the Silmarillion, which is J.R. Tolkien's sort of telling of the history of Middle-earth and all of its various ages and stories. And I like it a lot so far. It's really interesting because it's written not as like a historic tome, but as a collection of various legends throughout the eons. And it ranges from these sort of mythic, almost biblical tales of the beginning and the creation of time to more chivalric stories that are like more traditional medieval romances, for example. And it's really interesting to see how his writing style kind of changes from story to story. Like the mythic creation ones are definitely done in the way that are written in the way that's like kind of hard to understand because it's a very dense and, for lack of a better word, highfalutin language. So but I like it a lot so far, and I'm just getting started, so I'm getting into it, but it is quite dense, and I think I'll probably take a little bit of time reading it, even if it is not that long. It just is a lot of information to absorb.
I've had a few friends read this, and like they've described it as like reading like a dense history book.
I guess it's kind of like a history book, but it definitely feels more like just like a book of a compilation of legends or almost like biblical stories in a way. I would compare it maybe to reading like Beowulf in high school, where it's kind of hard to understand. It has that language that is of a different time, and the way that J.R. Tolkien is able to ape that is really interesting. But yeah, it is kind of like a history book because it is like the history of Middle Earth. But I like that it's kind of told in contained stories in a way.
Yeah, I'm wondering how much this is going to influence that series that's coming to Amazon. What is that, next year?
Yes, I think it's next year. I think it's highly going to influence it because the series is supposed to be a prequel, and I know it's drawing a lot from, I think, the Second Age of Middle Earth, which the Silmarillion gets deep into. So, I think this will probably be essential reading for that series. I guess I'll be that expert. We'll see.
Yeah. You'll be the expert once it starts airing.
Yes.
What else have you been reading?
So I've been listening to an audiobook, actually, of Lord of the Rings. I'm usually not a huge fan of audiobooks. Whenever I listen to them, I often just kind of fall asleep to them. I feel like a source because I was conditioned to do so. When I was little, my mom used to borrow audiobooks from the library to play for me when I was going to bed, and I would just like fall asleep to them and have some really wacky dreams. But my friend highly recommended Phil Dragash's audiobook of Lord of the Rings, and this is actually a fan creation. It's not the official audiobook, and it's probably more akin to an audio drama because Phil Dragash, he inserts Howard Shore's scores from the film. He puts on different voices, and he puts on different effects, auditory effects throughout the audiobook, and it's really just compelling and gripping to listen to, and something that for me, who's not a big audiobook listener, really likes to has really been absorbed by for the past how many chapters I'm in? I think I'm only like 3 chapters in. Each chapter is like about. The first chapter was like an hour, and it was an hour of Bilbo's birthday party. And I was like, I didn't remember this going on this long. But it's really good so far, and it's all available for free online. He actually posted it all on his website. You can find it on YouTube, and I'm currently listening to it on SoundCloud right now.
Okay, maybe we can put a link for that in the show notes. And you've been also reading some manga?
Yeah. I received for the 35th anniversary of Nausicaa, the Valley of the Winds release, I received the original manga, the first issue of the manga, of which the film is adapting, and also the Blu-ray of Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind. It's kind of funny because we were talking about this on the podcast last week, and then a couple days later I received the Blu-ray for it, and I was like, oh, I guess that was easy. Just think it, and I get it. So that was really cool. But
by the way, it's funny how many people are sending like Chris like eBay links on how to like get the Miyazaki movies on DVD or whatever.
You should watch them, Chris. They're really good. Anyways, I had never read the manga of Nausicaa before. I had only seen the movie. I do know that it was, despite what many people kind of assume, it is based off of the manga that Hayao Miyazaki wrote. He actually wrote it without the intention of turning it into a film adaptation. And this was something that he started writing soon after his directorial debut, which was The Castle of Cagliostro. And back when he was striking out as an anime director, it was very unusual for anime filmmakers of the time to do original movies. Most of the time they were adaptations of pre-existing manga. And so his ideas, I think, for originals or other films had gotten shot down, so he decided to write the Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind manga. And became a huge hit, and he eventually turned it into a film adaptation and launched the Studio Ghibli from there. So it's really cool, just kind of like going into that history and seeing where it all began. The manga definitely follows, or rather the film follows exactly like the first issue of the manga. And I know the manga goes on for several issues, and the story continues way past where the film ends. I have a friend actually who had read all of the manga, and he wasn't actually a fan of the movie because he said that the manga is much better and it's much more intricate and elaborate. So I'm curious. I might actually check out the rest of the manga at some point because it is like amazingly well written, and Miyazaki, of course, is an amazing storyteller. So I would to see like what he had envisioned for the full story of Nausicaa and where it was going before like he decided to go on and do other films.
You know, HT, there's a hardcover collection of the entire series that was on Amazon, discounted like $20 a few months ago, and I bought it because I figured I'd get around to reading it someday. So be on the lookout for the hardcover collection. I feel like the best way to possibly have all of it.
Yeah, I will do that then.
Okay, let's move on to what we've been watching. Over the weekend, Ben and I both went and saw a press screening of Aladdin, the new live-action adaptation of the Disney classic. And I think it's fair to say that everybody on this podcast has been dreading this adaptation because, you know, all the marketing to this thing has kind of given us a bad taste in our mouth. Like, you know, Will Smith as Genie looks horrible in the trailers. That clip that they played last week that Jacob had what did you do? Like, it was like a dissection, shot by shot of how horrible it was on this podcast. So I was kind of dreading this. I was walking into the theater with Ben and I was like, I hope at least this is an interesting disaster or an entertaining disaster. And I think, Ben, you said to me, is like, I don't even expect it to be that or something like that.
Yeah. So
I am actually surprised to say that this is not a disaster. It's actually, I'm not going to say it's a home run. It's a lot better than I was expecting it to be. It's surprisingly fun. We were in a press screening and there was people laughing. There was people clapping. Naomi Scott does a great job as Jasmine. I think the actor cast of Aladdin is not great. And the music in this, like when it sticks closer to the original songbook of Aladdin, is better. When it tries to do new takes on that material, it's not as good. We saw it in 3D, which is actually kind of strange because Disney usually doesn't show press screenings in 3D, and I have this theory that 3D kind of hides bad CG. It's harder to see bad CG, and I'm sure that is part of why they showed it to us in 3D. But it looked great. The costumes and the big elaborate sets. I feel like I don't know. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed this. And this is sounding like I really liked the film. I'm not saying I really liked the film, but it was actually, I don't know. I'd give it like a 6.5 out of 10. I don't know if that's too high. But Ben, I haven't talked to you because I had to run out of my screening to make it to another event that night. What did you think of Aladdin?
I was fully expecting to walk out and be like, that is a 1 or 2 out of 10 movie based on everything that we've seen from it so far. And I was completely won over by this movie, and I'm shocked by it because I was so sure that I was going to hate it because I love the original, but everything about this movie pretty much won me over to it. I think there are like a couple small things, but I would probably give it like an 8 out of 10 or something. And I'm shocked to even say that. Like I had there was nothing, there was zero chance in my mind that the movie would be that good when I walked into it. So I'm really just sort of aghast at how how they were able to pull something so good out of this. I realize, you know, there's a big part of me that is like, that wants to be cynical about the live action Disney remake thing, but setting aside all of the, you know, issues that I may have with Disney and the way that the company can be run sometimes and all of that, and just looking at this movie as a movie, and not bringing in anything outside of that, it's really, really good, guys. Like I know, I mean, it has really awesome messages. Jasmine, Naomi Scott's character, is a much more central figure in the movie. My wife and I were talking about it afterwards, and I think she said something like, it's Jasmine's movie disguised as Aladdin's movie, really. And I think that's an accurate read on it. I think Will Smith is actually like really good as the genie. Like, he mixes the comedy stuff, some of which works better than others, with like some dramatic moments like that actually worked for me and were very affecting. So and
the genie gets more of an arc as well as Jasmine.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the casting, I know you don't really like the guy Mina Masood who plays Aladdin, Peter, but I thought he was like terrific. I thought him and Naomi Scott were just, I mean, they're unbelievably good-looking people, and so that helps a lot. They're like gorgeous to look at and just mesmerizing and compelling that way. But I think they also just capture the essence of those characters so well. And Naomi Scott, in particular, she has this new song that was added, and that's one of those moments where I was like, "Oh boy, here comes the new song." That just sort of feels like a box they have to check, you know, in order to differentiate it from the old movie. But I think that new song that she sings, it's called Speechless, it like encapsulates the entire purpose of the movie. Like, that's the whole reason for them to make it. It's like everything seemed to sort of ripple out from that song, and she kills it. It's so good. So yeah, I'm shocked to report that I ended up really, really liking this movie a lot.
This is a very funny practical joke. Can I get the real...
I will say this: the new song feels so out of place, though. Like, I mean, it thematically, I agree with you, Ben. Like, story wise, it is perfect, but it just seems so out of line with all the rest of the music in the movie. But it seems more like a you know, like a Let It Go kind of, you know, like that kind of style of. Right?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I guess I see what you're talking about, because a lot of the other music in the movie is sort of like upbeat and peppy, and this is more of like a dramatic song.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can see that, but I still think, you know, thematically it works so well, and it really justifies the movie's existence in a way that I think Beauty and the Beast didn't justify it. Like the change in Jasmine's character, or not so much change, but evolution of that character, I think justifies this movie being made. And the fact that kids are going to see this and, you know, have like the representation in the movie is such a positive force. I think, you know, like I said, there's a lot of issues that I have with Disney overall, but I think just looking at this as a movie, there's so much good, so much net good is going to come out of this, I think.
Yeah, I think people are going to, I think kids are going to love this film. Okay, let's get serious, guys. HBO, you know, bringing things to a conclusion. Let's talk, you know, everybody wants to hear about this. Jacob, what did you think of the season finale of Barry?
Was that supposed to be like a humorous reveal, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, wait, people don't want to hear about Barry?
Of course they want to hear about Barry. It's probably the most consistent show on HBO right now. And Barry's built around a single question, which is, can people change? I feel like a lot of shows, you know, say they're about something, but they often, you know, meander. Whereas I feel every single episode of Barry has asked the question, can a person change? And explored that in some way. And last night's episode, the season 2 finale, directly addressed that question and gave an answer that I don't think anyone was expecting. And oh boy, it is a dark, dark half hour of television. And Bill Hader directed it, and he's directed episodes before, but this episode is just, it's terrifying to watch. The violence in this episode is in that Barry way, not treated as a joke. It's filmed in a way that what happens so fast and so with such terror that you can barely quantify that's happening until it's over. And the season wraps up a lot of the other arcs and opens up new ones. Every character gets something to do. Sally, Barry's girlfriend in the show, her arc takes also a very dark, sinister direction, but not as sinister as others. But I am eagerly waiting for season 3 because this season ends on such a Breaking Bad-esque note of deep, deep unpleasantness. While also being funny, because that's Barry's way, is being really funny, even as it's being the nastiest show on HBO next to Game of Thrones. Ben, what did you think?
Yeah, I loved it, man. I am very impressed with the consistency of the quality of second season. I think the show it came out relatively fully formed in season one, but I feel like it took a little bit to sort of figure out its style and to perfect the tone. But I feel like that's really what they've done in season two is just perfect that tone that they're going for. And man, yeah, I mean, we're talking about like an exponential increase, and if from season one, and if that continues, this is going to be like hands down the best show on television in season three. So I mean, that's a big bar for it to leap, but they're they're definitely capable of getting there if they can pick up the threads that they've left hanging in this season finale. So and just a quick shout out too for Henry Winkler, who is like an actor that I feel like a lot of people for many years just sort of wrote off as like a joke. He is doing some jaw-dropping dramatic work in this show, and he won an Emmy last year, so it's not like he's like some unheralded, this is an unheralded performance, but it's a deserved Emmy, and he continues to do tremendous work in that show. So Henry Winkler, you're the man.
Yeah, and I know that I was watching Game of Thrones with friends, as always, and someone said they hadn't watched Barry yet because the concept of a hitman wants to be an actor sounded so hokey to them, and they couldn't get beyond that. And if you're one of those people, 2 seasons in, 16 half-hour episodes, I think it's time to give Barry a chance if you haven't yet, because this show deserves the same audience as Silicon Valley and the same audience as Breaking Bad. It's striking both those nerves at the same time, and that's unreal.
Yeah, I feel like Barry is not getting the word of mouth that I see like a show like Ozark getting, and I know Ben, you were really down on Ozark season 2, and I feel like those people should jump over to Barry.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. I guess that's all to talk about on HBO. Nothing big else happened on that channel. So let's talk about John Wick Chapter 3. Jacob, you saw this week?
Yeah, Peter, this movie rules. This movie rules hard. So I'm a self-admitted John Wick fanatic, and this is the one where I decided I think this is the most consistent American action movie franchise of all time. I mean, maybe there are better individual movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Die Hard, just to name but ones that come to mind, the later Mission Impossibles. But I think all 3 John Wicks are near perfect action movies that execute their simple premises flawlessly with brilliantly directed action, great actors who aren't phoning it in, really clever writing, and just they're upping the ante in ways where the action is getting more impressive without becoming bloated. I feel like these movies are still like lean, mean, and so much fun. I had a great time with John Wick 3, and I think this is my favorite action franchise of all time.
Yeah, no, it's definitely up there. I love this film. I love this world. I want to spend more time in it. I think Ben's right. That first 30 minutes you can't top some of the stuff that happens in that first 30 minutes. But I love watching, the dogs kick ass with Halle Berry, who was not in it enough. I love how brutal this movie is. Like, in parts where you think they're going to cut away or something, they're like showing you, I don't know. They're showing you things that you shouldn't be seeing on the big screen in ways you've never seen them before. And, I don't know. My only complaint about this movie, and I wish we could talk about spoilers here. My only complaint about this movie is the more days it goes by, I'm wondering, like, the plot doesn't really make much sense to me.
Well, we should have a spoiler casting, because I would love to talk about this at length, because I'm not sure I agree with you there.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, I think the plot is pretty simple, and I would also like to join on this conversation. Defend John Wick. Not that he needs any defenders.
I have a question for you, HC, since you're piping in here. Peter described scenes that are we don't see in mainstream action movies in John Wick 3. And earlier on the Slack, we discussed how you were very averse to eye violence. So how did you deal with the eye violence in John Wick 3?
Well, for John Wick, I don't mind it as much because it's so heightened and over the top. Yeah, I guess I'm making an exception for this movie. And with like action films, for example, I feel like horror films tend to get under my skin more and don't know how to explain why.
Oh, my other nitpick about this movie, I wanted to see what you guys think of this, is, well, first of all, I love the, the battle scene with the guys from the raid and stuff like that. Like, that's great, but I feel like this movie doesn't have a great villain for John Wick to go up against.
No,
I disagree completely. Here.
Yeah, you're wrong.
Really? Am I wrong?
Yes.
HT, tell him why he's wrong.
Tell me why I'm wrong.
Mark Dacascos is the perfect foil for John Wick, where John Wick is the stoic, serious, stern type. Dacascos is just buoyant and hilarious and irreverent, and a fanboy at that, which I feel like...
I like the fanboy stuff, but like, well, okay, I guess what I'm trying to say is like the film doesn't like build up that character to be like this formidable bad guy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he just kind of shows up.
He's like the secondary villain to, I think Asia Kate Dillon does a great job with their role. They have this real aura to them that's just incredibly, keep your hands dirty, whereas Mark Dacascos gets to do the dirty work. And I like that dichotomy between the two villains, and it doesn't feel too crowded or I feel like you don't need something that's like, world controlling. It's just a simple nice simple stakes with these two.
Yeah, and I think he's set up, Peter. I think, you see enough of him doing like ninja shadowy stuff before he actually gets to a big confrontation with Wick. I feel like it's pretty well established there.
He still feels like a minion for the table. Like he just it doesn't feel like, it feels like this is a movie, like if this was a Star Wars movie, it feels like, Luke Skywalker is fighting to the end at the Death Star and he doesn't get to fight Darth Vader, he just fights a bunch of stormtroopers.
But Darth Vader is
a henchman.
Yeah, what are you talking about?
But he is an iconic henchman. I don't know. I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I just feel like it's kind of strange how this franchise, it's all about our hero, and there really isn't an iconic villain. I mean, I guess it's the people behind the scenes control. It's the Emperor. Those. You know what I mean?
I would love it if when we meet the High Table, the main unseen villains of the series is played by like Chow Yun-fat and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Michelle Yeoh and just a bunch of like legendary older action stars.
That'll be amazing.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Oh.
Okay. Now that we've talked, have we said everything we need to say about John Wick 3?
Never. We'll never have to say about John Wick, but we probably should move on anyway.
Okay. On Friday night, they had some advanced screenings of Booksmart at my local AMC theater, so I went with Kitra to go see that. I had been hearing a lot of great things about this film. Who did I hear from? Was it you, Jacob?
Yeah, I loved this film in South by.
Yeah, and this is Olivia Wilde's directorial debut, I think, right?
Yeah, her feature
debut. And it's a great feature debut. I, as you know, am a huge fan of coming-of-age films. I love movies that take place over the course of one night. Can't Hardly Wait is one of my favorites. Superbad, I love. This definitely seems like it's inspired by Superbad. Coming out of this movie is a solid directorial debut. It has great characters. It's filled with laughs. Great comedic performances across the board. I think the standout is honestly like the only couple scenes with Wilde's husband, Jason Sudeikis. I loved him in this. It has a fantastic soundtrack. That said, going into this movie, I think my expectations were just too high. I was a little disappointed. Not to say I didn't like the movie. I like that it has like this emotional core that it kind of gets to late in the film, and but I feel like, I guess my problem with it's more of a matter of taste, and I wish the movie was more grounded. Now would be the time, if Brad was on the podcast, that he would jump in and yell at me. But I feel like this movie wants to be Superbad, but it's more Harold and Kumar, because it's a little bit, every scene is a little bit ridiculous and too over the top to be real, and that kind of annoys me a little bit, but I liked it, and I will recommend it, but just so you know, it's not it does go outside the bounds of like a normal high school movie. Like it goes to places that I think are a bit ridiculous. Jacob, am I wrong?
I think it is ridiculous, but I also think the ridiculous stuff is incredibly funny, and and even though it is ridiculous, it sets up stuff that I think is genuinely emotionally true. But I think it's going to be a matter of taste, Peter. I think you've established, what your comedic tastes are, and maybe it doesn't align with that, and that's perfectly fine. I think that some people are going to have like extreme emotional reactions to this film, and which I did, in addition to laughing a whole bunch, and you did, and that's perfectly fine. But I do think that the people who react to this movie the way I did will find something that they absolutely treasure, whereas I think everyone else will find a movie they like, and I think that's a really good position for a movie to be in.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail, or hit the hammer, or the nail on the hammer, the hammer on the nail, one of those two.
Close
nail on the head.
Nail on the head.
Saying.
Yeah,
with the hammer.
Yes, with the hammer, and I think it is a movie I like, and I will recommend, but it's not a movie I love. So yeah, this week also, I was talking about Masterclass, I think last week or the week before, and Masterclass released a new class in honor of, I think, World Barbecuing Day or something. Aaron Franklin, who owns Franklin Barbecue, which is in your hometown of Austin, Texas, Jacob, and is featured in many TV shows and commercials, and in Jon Favreau's movie Chef. It's probably the best barbecue place I've ever gone to. I know Jacob probably has better, but
I haven't actually. Oh. The hype is real.
Yeah, the hype is real. Well, he filmed a masterclass teaching how to, make barbecue, and I've only watched a couple episodes so far, and he starts off like basically showing how to cut wood and put the wood in a smoker and stuff, and like never like once does like, if you want to do barbecue, you should get this kind of smoker or whatever. It's like this like big smoker in his backyard or whatever. So I'm not sure how practical this course is for anybody outside of like, if someone has a huge smoker in their backyard in Texas. But it is so interesting to find out how he is able to make this barbecue so good. Like just like all the little details that add up to this, the best barbecue in the world. So I would highly recommend checking out Aaron Franklin's Masterclass. I think that's like $90 for the class, or $180 for 1 year of subscription to all the master classes, which is what I'm doing. So I'll probably end up talking about some of those in future editions. But it is a little strange because like if you watch like Gordon Ramsay's masterclass, he starts out in his kitchen and he goes over like all the utensils and all the like the tools that you will need to like make good food. And in this, like, it's just like Aaron Franklin in his backyard being like, okay, here's how you put the wood in the smoker. so yeah.
But this makes sense though, because in interviews with local press, he's always insisted that whenever everybody says, "Oh, you must have a secret blend of spices," he always says, "Nope, salt and pepper. It's all about the wood and all about the temperature and all about the time." So it makes sense that he'd focus on that, because that is what he's been saying for years.
I just wish it was for more of a beginner so I could get into it, although I doubt I'm allowed to have a smoker on my patio. So anyways, and I watched the season finale of Survivor, which was one of the better season finales, and in typical Survivor fashion, the person who should have won didn't win. It was great. I enjoyed it, even though I don't agree with the winner. So there you go. Jacob, what have you been watching?
I watched the first 2 episodes of HBO's Chernobyl, the new miniseries from writer-creator Craig Mazin. And I was hesitant to watch this, not because it didn't look good. They've been pushing it really, really hard during Game of Thrones. I see a trailer for it all the time. But because I just didn't know if I need another super depressing show in my life right now. But turns out I did, because Chernobyl is exceptionally good. The 3rd episode premieres tonight out of 5. And the first episode deals with the disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Soviet Union in 1986. And the first episode is pretty much all disaster, all fires, all people dying of radiation poisoning, and things going so wrong so quickly that the show deliberately does not keep you in the loop. You do not know what went wrong, how it's going wrong, or even what you're seeing. And at first, I thought maybe I was missing something. Then in episode 2, experts are brought in to survey the situation, and episode 2 in a way I found really pleasurable as like storytelling. The experts explain, here's what's going on, here's why the things you saw in the previous episode were so bad, and here's why it's going to get a whole lot worse very quickly. And so it went from being this horrifying hour to being a talk heavy hour where the dialogue managed to make episode 1 better and also be just as horrifying as the actual visuals of episode 1. So I'm really hoping it sticks to landing. And Chris, you've seen it all for review on the site, right?
Yeah, yes, I have.
Does it stick to that landing?
Yes, it does. This is really good. This is it's very stressful. It's a very upsetting miniseries. I think it's only 5 episodes, so you don't have to commit to it that much. But I watched it with my wife. My wife had a similar thing, Jacob, where we were watching the first episode and she kept asking me questions. And I was like, I don't know. I'm watching the same show as you. Let's wait and find out. And she was like, what is going on? So if you're prone to questions, don't worry. They do eventually explain everything.
Yeah, Jared Harris shows up and they manage to make all his exposition so terrifying because he's so worried and he comes across as so smart on screen that when he's freaking out and explaining things, you're on the edge of your seat. It's really, really upsetting.
Very cool. And I've only watched like the beginning of the first episode, and it was like late at night, and I was like, okay, we're not awake enough to watch this. So I've been hearing so many good things about this, so I'm gonna have to check it out. Ben, what have you been watching?
So I had a chance to go to the theater and see a screening of The Dead Don't Die, which is the zombie movie that is written and directed by Jim Jarmusch. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it.
Jarmusch.
Okay. So guys, I hated this movie. I'm not going to beat around the bush on this one. It has an incredible cast: Adam Driver, Bill Murray, Steve Buscemi, Tilda Swinton, Tom Waits, Danny Glover. I mean, like the list. I think on the poster it says, I'm looking at it right here, the greatest zombie cast ever disassembled. And I feel like they might actually have a claim there because the cast is unbelievable, but they're just given nothing to do in this movie. This is one of the slowest, most sluggishly paced movies that I can remember seeing like in my entire life. I think it's only like an hour and 40 minutes, but it just feels like maybe it's less than that. But it feels like it lasts forever. It is just like an interminable movie to get through. And it's like as if somebody, and this is my first Jim Jarmusch movie, so I don't know what and I realize he's like a staple of the independent film movement from the 90s and all of that, and has made probably a bunch of great stuff. But for this being my entry point, I have like almost no interest in going back and revisiting some of his early stuff, and that may not be fair, but like this movie was so bad that I was very, very, very turned off to anything that he was doing. I feel like it was just made by somebody who had nothing to say, really, nothing insightful to say, and it was just, oh my God. Has anybody else seen this here? I know we have like a relatively negative review up on the site right now from Cannes, but has anybody seen this yet?
I got an invite to see it, and all the bland reviews out of Cannes just made me like killed my enthusiasm, so I didn't bother to go, and now it's sounding more and more likely that I made the right choice. That said, Jim Jarmusch's movies are often very slow, but he has some really, really great movies. So I would urge you to seek out his earlier stuff, Ben, even if you didn't like this, because like Only Lovers Left Alive is really good. Dead Man is really good. They're slow movies, but they're great. So it does sound like this is a dud for him, but his earlier movies are good.
Yeah, maybe Jarmusch is really hard to get into, Ben, but there are some good ones. But if you reacted so hard to the pace of this one, then it may just not be for you overall, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, the pace was not necessarily the thing that bothered me as much as being forced to sit through a movie with this pace that had nothing but surface level observations to make about the state of American politics right now. Basically, the movie's message boils down to Trump is bad. And it's like, oh, really? No shit. Thanks a lot for making me sit through a whole movie for that. So, yeah, anyway, I'll be curious to see if anybody here actually ever gives this movie a shot, and if you end up disagreeing with me, if I'm like way off the mark on this, especially those of you who have seen his earlier work and maybe can contextualize it better, up against his entire filmography. But yeah, I was not a fan of this one. So the other movie that I saw that was way better than this, or I enjoyed it way more anyway, is The Night of the Hunter, which is from 1955. This is on the Criterion Channel right now. It is the only movie directed by Charles Laughton, who is an actor who he was an Oscar winner who was in a bunch of stuff, Witness for the Prosecution and Jamaica Inn and Mutiny on the Bounty and Spartacus. I mean, he's been in a lot of things, but this was the only movie he ever made as a director. And this movie rules. It is about a priest who is actually a serial killer, and he's played by Robert Mitchum. And he just sort of rolls into this town and basically ends up trying to seduce the wife of a guy who robbed a bank for $10,000, and the guy has been taken out of the picture. So Robert Mitchum's character just comes in to sort of prey on this family and try to get this money. And it's all about greed and avarice, and it's like, this dark, moody piece. I think HT would really appreciate it based on your love of gothic related things. Just the cinematography in this is so gorgeous, and the acting is so on point. I mean, I think for a lot of people, we were talking a lot about A Star Is Born last year with Bradley Cooper making his directorial debut, and there was a big discussion about actors stepping behind the camera and, how a lot of times that just doesn't work for one reason or another. There are relatively few directorial debuts from actors that work really well. I'm glad to hear that Booksmart is another one that does work. But this one I think is up there or has to be up there in the conversation of the best movies that were ever directed by people who are primarily known as actors. So it's called The Night of the Hunter, and I would highly, highly recommend it. It's on Criterion Channel right now.
I wanted to jump in here too, because Night of the Hunter is amazing. And if you didn't recommend it to HT, I was going to do so right here, because this is not only it's a film noir fairy tale is how the best way I would describe it.
Oh wait, that's my two favorite things.
Yeah, and Guillermo del Toro has cited this many times as one of his chief inspirations for Pan's Labyrinth and other films like that. So even though you may not see an immediate connection, the film is shot in a way where it feels like a fable reinterpreted through someone's nightmares. It is incredibly good.
Yeah, and a lot of it is told through the perspective of the kids in this family, and it's got a lot of that Americana childhood vibe, but this looming predator is just lurking in the distance. And Robert Mitchum, who's a guy who's probably best known for noir movies like Out of the Past, it's just so scary in this movie. I think you would really dig it, HT.
Okay, I'm gonna check it out.
What else have I watched? Oh, I DVR'd a movie from off of Turner Classic Movies called The Detective, or that's what it's called in the United States. I guess abroad it's referred to as Father Brown. This is a 1954 British mystery film that is also a comedy, and it starred Alec Guinness as a priest who basically gets in a battle of wits with a thief who is trying to steal the priest's cross. There's even just getting into the basic plot of the movie, I mean, it gets a little convoluted, but it's basically like an Ocean's 11 style movie where the priest, who is supposed to be this upstanding figure in society, he has learned the tricks of the trade of how to be a thief and a detective and all of this, and he basically puts himself in the minds of thieves and killers and things like that, and he learned all this stuff from his parishioners. So it's this really fun performance from Alec Guinness, who I hadn't really seen in very many things outside of the Star Wars movies. So anybody who's interested in just checking out early Alec Guinness stuff, you'll find a lot to enjoy here. His performance is pretty enjoyable. It's a little ridiculous at times, as is the movie overall, but there's a really good kernel of a story there, even though a few scenes sort of meander off and go into some weird directions. But this one's a lot of fun. It's called The Detective, or Father Brown, depending on where you are. And then finally, I saw Shoplifters, and I know this was HT's number one movie of last year, I think, right?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so I heard from you that this was a must-see. This is on Hulu right now. I would recommend for people who have not seen it yet and are interested in checking it out, if you watch it on Hulu, don't read the synopsis on Hulu, like the brief, like 1 or 2 sentence synopsis there, because it gives away something that happens an hour and a half into the movie, and the movie is not much longer than that. So my wife read it before we push play, and was just like waiting for this thing to happen the whole time, and I didn't know that was going to happen. So it drastically changed my experience. I guess this is a larger part of the conversation we've been having about spoilers, but anyway, yeah, this movie is very good. This was the first film that I've ever seen from, what is his name? Hirokazu Koreeda, excuse me. And so I'm not sure if this is like representative of his work overall, but I really enjoyed the sort of, this is another movie that has sort of like a slow pace, but it's very lyrical, and it's very, it's confident in its storytelling. It settles into a small story and knows what it's doing, and just takes its time to establish these really interesting, fascinating dynamics between this family, or they're not a real family, but sort of are related by blood, but they are a family. They're these group of outcasts and people living in Tokyo who come from different aspects of life, and a new young girl is added to their ranks, and she is abused and sort of is taken under the wing of this family. And it's a small story, but it's really beautifully told. And I think a couple of the plot machinations may have gotten lost in translation for me near the end, but I have the Slash Filmcast review of Shoplifters, which HT was a guest on, queued up to listen to maybe this afternoon after I'm done working. So I'm looking forward to diving in and reading a little bit more about this movie. And I would definitely recommend it, though. It's on Hulu right now.
The Slash Filmcast was a little less warm to this movie than I was, so just a warning, because they kind of come down hard on it, and I was I was a little upset on the podcast.
Oh man, okay.
Yeah, no, I've also been waiting to see this movie until it became available somewhere, and I saw it just recently became available on Hulu. It's on my Watch Next or whatever on the Apple TV, so I'm excited to see it. Chris, you got to preview some episodes of the new Black Mirror?
Yes, I got all 3 of the new Black Mirror episodes. I can't give away anything yet because it's embargo, but I'll just say it's good. That doesn't count as a review. I can get away with saying that it's good. If you weren't a fan of the previous season, which I actually wasn't that much, this is better, and it's shorter. It's only 3 episodes, so it's easier to get through. Beyond that, what did I watch?
Well, with the anniversary of The Matrix, everybody's revisiting The Matrix, but you're revisiting another Keanu film.
Yes, well, I actually watched. Yeah. I got The Matrix on 4K a little while ago before it was the anniversary and watched it. So instead, I rewatched Speed, the movie that, even though it wasn't Keanu Reeves' first action movie because he made Point Break before that, this was sort of the thing that solidified him as an action movie guy. And Speed rules. It's still good. It's still great. I think it's one of the best action movies ever made. It's got a really tight script. Graham Yost is credited, but really Joss Whedon came in and did a really big rewrite on it, even though he's not credited. So that's kind of the reason why it has this really snappy, clever, funny script, and is really well directed. Jan de Bont, he started as a cinematographer, so he has this really great handle on shooting action because he did cinematography on Die Hard and all these other action movies. So he really, I don't know if he still does because he hasn't made a good movie in a long time, but he really used to have this great grasp on filming action sequences. And it's just this really tight, funny, entertaining action movie. And I wish they would still make movies like this. They really don't anymore. Everything's like, kind of boring when it comes, aside from, John Wick and stuff like that. I can't remember the last time I really enjoyed an action movie outside of, John Wick and Mission Impossible. And I wish they would still make stuff like this, and they don't anymore. And it's a shame. But Speed, it's great.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that. I was going to say, why don't they make more movies like Speed? I love Speed. And also, why does Speed not get its due? I feel like it is not like in the movies you hear listed. It's not like up there with Die Hard, but I feel like it should be.
I agree. I don't understand why. I don't think people dislike Speed. I think people just.
But it feels I feel like people treat it more as a popcorn action movie than like a action classic.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it definitely had an impact on culture. The jokes were everywhere. You couldn't get away from just the concept of the bus that will blow up. But yeah, I don't know why it doesn't have as big of a cultural impact now as, say, something like Die Hard, when I really do think it is, if not equal to Die Hard, it's up there with Die Hard as being this really clever action movie that doesn't get its due. I don't know. Maybe it'll change now because I'm talking about it. And I'm going to set the trend. Everyone go out and revisit Speed.
Chris is starting trends now. HTC, you read Dune. You finished reading Dune last week. Did you watch the movie finally?
I did. I prepared for it by ordering some extra spicy curry, and I wanted to let the spice flow, as they say in Dune. This is a beautiful disaster of a movie, and I didn't totally hate it. The choices that David Lynch makes in this movie are bizarre and wild and a little bit just baffling, but it's something. Like, he's doing something with this film. And, like, honestly, reading Dune and imagining, like, trying to bring that to life on the big screen, like, I feel like David Lynch did it in the only way that could have been possible at the time, while still translating and some elements that into a more bizarre version of them than I could have imagined. Basically, he shot for the stars and he landed and broke his neck, but he did it. So Dune is there's so many strange choices. Like, for example, the frequent voiceovers that are the people's thoughts throughout the books are presented in this sort of whispered tones throughout the film, which become increasingly hilarious because it's just like there's no way of like presenting people's thoughts except for doing these like weird whispers. And it's also fascinating to me because I felt like because this came out after Star Wars became a major phenomenon, the David Lynch Dune leaned more into the sci-fi elements that I feel like didn't quite exist or wasn't as present in the book. So I could almost feel like they're trying to make their next Star Wars, the more adult Star Wars, because there was a lot of body horror. There's a lot of just mature and grotesque stuff happening in here, but like the way that the designs and the settings were made felt very in the vein of Star Wars. And even the score was like, I think one of the frequent motifs of it sounded very similar to one of John Williams' scores. I think it was like Darth Vader's motif, which I found hilarious. So yes, I think that in trying to become more like Star Wars and trying to lean into those sci-fi elements, that's where Dune kind of stumbles, because when it becomes incredibly weird and very high fantasy, then it does feel like a movie that could have succeeded, but it does not. And that's okay, because it's just a weird movie that exists in its little corner and is trying to do its own thing.
I feel like there's a bunch of movies that were supposed to be something else, and because of Star Wars came out, like if you look at like what is that movie, that Disney movie Black Hole? Like, that totally got changed into kind of like a Star Wars-y thing, and it was in development before Star Wars. So I feel like there's a good list there of movies like that. What other movies did you watch this week?
A much better movie that I watched is a film called Kylie Blues. And this is a movie I watched on the Criterion Channel streaming service. It's directed by Began. This is his directorial debut, which introduced him as the new sort of great Chinese auteur of like this current time. He has a new film out right now called A Long Day's Journey into Night, that is showing in select theaters. It's showing in New York still, I think, but you might be hard-pressed to find it elsewhere. His new film is getting a lot of rave reviews, so I wanted to check out his first film, which is this very dreamlike, incredibly mesmerizing journey about this one man who takes a trip through the rural provinces of China to find his nephew who has gone missing. And this journey becomes both physical and metaphysical as he ends up kind of drifting through dreams and reality and fantasy. It's really fascinating and really hypnotic film. don't know how to describe it other than like its very base premise, but I recommend it. It's just an incredibly beautiful and entrancing film that will transport you.
And you watch Good Omens?
Yes. So my review of Good Omens is up on the site right now if you want to check it out. Good Omens is it hits Amazon Prime next week on May 31st. It's May now. And I got to see all 6 episodes of this miniseries before it hits the service. This was one of my most anticipated TV series of the year. I had read the book by Neil Gaiman.
I feel like so much about this is like your thing. Like this is like,
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I really enjoyed the book, and I liked the show a lot. And I think that the casting of David Tennant and Michael Sheen was a stroke of genius because they are incredible and funny and just magnetic to watch. When the problem is when the show takes away their focus from them, it becomes less fun, but it's still incredibly enjoyable and something that is doing something a little different. It is a fantasy comedy about the coming apocalypse and the birth of the Antichrist. And David Tennant plays a demon named Crowley who has a wary friendship with an angel named Aziraphale, played by Michael Sheen. And their friendship has spanned eons since they were there at the beginning of time. And when they learn that the apocalypse is coming, they try to avert it. But it's definitely more of like a comedy of manners. It's very just irreverent and funny. There's this sort of Monty Python-esque visual style to it, as well as the comedy to it as too. And while Tennant and Sheen are just heaven to watch, the other supporting characters are a bit of a drag sometimes, but it doesn't take away from the funny as hell and enjoyable as hell tone of the rest of the series.
Very cool. And we'll do a link to your Good Omens review in the show notes. So I guess this brings us to the end of what we've been watching. Nothing else aired on television this week that was important whatsoever, except for, Game of Thrones. Okay, Game of Thrones aired the season or series finale. Ben and Jacob, you watched it. Ben, what did you think?
I really liked it. I think, it's sort of a bittersweet ending. That's the word that George R. R. Martin used to describe what he plans to do with his ending of the book series that the show is based on. And I know that this season as a whole has been really divisive for people, but I think Jacob and I both really, really enjoyed. I mean, I don't know. It's so difficult. There's a line in this episode where Tyrion Lannister says, "Ask me again in 10 years about whether or not Jon Snow made the correct decision to do something." And I think that is a really good line that sort of sums up how we're all going to be thinking about Game of Thrones for the next few years. Like we're so close to the airing of this episode that it's almost impossible to accurately assess the show's legacy this soon. But I think in the moment right now, I'm largely pleased with what happened in last night's episode. I feel like a lot of the characters that I wanted to see have satisfying conclusions got those conclusions in a way that I think makes sense for the characters and what we've seen of them so far. So, Jacob, I'll pass the ball to you.
Yeah, Ben and I wrote our joint review as usual. It's up on the site right now. And Ben, I'm going to miss reviewing the show with you quite a bit.
Me too.
This show means a lot to me, as we discussed in our big spoiler episode last week when we discussed the penultimate episode. And I was expecting the episode to really hit hard like last week's did, and it really didn't. It had some really tough choices and went to some maybe predictable places in the first half, stuff that we knew had to happen. But then it gave the characters I love, the survivors, a send-off I think that they all earned, and a send-off that made me very happy. And it left all the survivors ready for new adventures, and adventures that I'll never get to see. But being able to know they're having them gives me a satisfaction that makes me genuinely happy. And Game of Thrones never makes you happy; it makes you miserable. So the idea of Game of Thrones ending on a note that left me feeling positive and warm and satisfied. That's all I could have possibly asked for after all these years.
Yeah, that's a big deal for a show with a tone that's been as dark as it has been.
And you two are like a lot more positive about this, or last couple episodes, than people I follow online, like Dave Chen and stuff like that. It seems like there's been a very divisive response to this, not just the last couple episodes, but this season as a whole. It almost feels like, to me, you know, I don't watch Game of Thrones, so it's very hard for me to even talk about this, but if just from the outside looking in, it feels kind of like the last season of Lost for me. Like there was such like a mixed response to that, and specifically the ending and that whole season as a whole. Like, why do you guys think that is, especially with this episode?
I think a key part of it is the shift in, you know, the material. I mean, even if George R. R. Martin gave the showrunners an outline of what he planned, they are very, you know, different writers than he is. Without the source material, they had to, the show took a fundamental difference in the way it told its stories. And I think some people never got over that. And it's not their prerogative to get over it. The show did change. And for some people, it changed too much. And for some people, things that mattered to them stopped being a priority for the writers, who started prioritizing things that mattered to them instead. And I don't, you know, blame anyone for not liking what the show became. I was able to roll with it. I still loved it till the end, even though I think that a lot of the observations about why it didn't work or didn't work as well are well argued and make sense. But I do think that anything this popular, anything that inspires this much passion, is going to get those divisive responses. You know, like I hated Lost when it ended. I was mad the whole show. I was angry. I watched it, but now years later, I still do not like the last season of Lost, but I treasure the rest of that show. I do not regret it for a second. That show was a fundamental part of who I was at that time, in the same way that Game of Thrones has become a fundamental person of who I am now. So I just hope that when the dust settles, you know, Game of Thrones fandom, or people who enjoy Game of Thrones, it stops being less about how they didn't like the ending or how they liked the ending, and more about how that was a pretty fun 10 years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And HT, I know you stopped watching a couple seasons back. Are you, now that you've heard what happens in the ending, because I know you read all the spoilers and stuff, like, does this make you want to watch them, or are you just going to wait for the books? They're just never coming, right?
I'm just waiting for the books that are never coming. I had my reasons for parting with Game of Thrones. This story, the Song of Ice and Fire story, is something that was really special to me, in which I had a lot of investment in the characters. And the show, at first, too, was like very formative for me as well, because that's how I made a lot of my friends in college, and just kind of part of that experience in my life. But, you know, it went in a direction that I really did not like, and watching the show became more of a burden than an actual joy. So I stopped watching, and I don't regret that. I do miss the characters sometimes, and I did, like, you know, watch clips of my favorite characters as this final season went on, so I could see where they ended up. And I think that, like, this is where George R. R. Martin will probably take his series, if he ever finishes it. But I would be more satisfied to hear it coming from his point of view and his writing, rather than the show and the show writers who I've had my issues with.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's move on to what we've been eating. This last week, I discovered that a pizza place in Southern California. It's around the Hollywood area. It's called Lucifer's Pizza. They have a couple, or I think a few different shops. I've always loved their pizza, but now being on a low carb diet, keto diet, I can only eat 20 carbs a day, has prevented me from eating anything other than like the Quest makes a frozen pizza we've talked about on this podcast. But Lucifer's now has a cauliflower pizza, which, by the way, doesn't mean anything, because I think California Pizza Kitchen introduced the cauliflower pizza, but it's still like 15 carbs a slice of pizza. So don't think that just because you're eating cauliflower pizza that it's low carb, or that it's even better for you. It can be more calories and be, whatever. I guess if you're trying to get away from, the bread or So, but Lucifer's, I emailed the owners, and they told me that the whole pizza crust as a whole was 8 carbs. I ordered their ring burner, which is like their spicy. I got it at medium spice level, and I highly recommend it. I did my blood test before and after. It did not affect it. So I've eaten this twice now. So if you're in Southern California, if you're in the Hollywood area and you're trying to eat better or eat low carb, I would highly recommend checking out Lucifer's Pizza and their cauliflower pizza crust, and especially their ring burner pizza. So, Jacob, what have you been eating?
At your recommendation, I finally got around to trying High Key cookies, and they're essentially a low-carb, low-sugar cookie, and they taste very much like a Chips Ahoy cookie.
Yeah.
And I enjoy them a great deal. My only issue is cost. Amazon has 3 bags for $13, which is a little pricey. Each bag probably has 2 servings in it. But they are very good, and I'm just trying to parcel them out so I don't overdo it or don't blow through them too quickly. But as an alternative, dessert alternative, it is one of the best ones I've had so far.
Yeah. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. And let's move on to our last segment, what we've been playing. Jacob, what have you been playing this week?
I had my most recent Dungeons & Dragons session, one of the games I do not run. And a few weeks ago, I talked about retiring my current character because he had reached the end of the arc I did not know was ending until I realized it was time. And so today, a new character joined the adventuring party, and he is an orc barbarian named Horatio Limb-Thrasher. And he is backpacking through this medieval world from across the ocean, where he's from sort of a upper middle class background. Is totally unaware that in this world, people hate orcs and want to kill them. So he's just this kind of clueless upper middle class guy who just got out of college and wants to see the world. And in the same way people say, I'm going to go backpack through Eastern Europe where it's cheap and everything. And there's remnants of, the Soviet Union. This guy is doing that, except that he's not aware of the fact that everybody's going to want to kill him. So it's been a very fun character. And in our first session, he met a talking sword that is prejudiced against orcs. And now he has a magical, powerful sword that feels destined to be wielded by him, even though it hates him for being an orc. And it's a very interesting little buddy cop thing going on.
Very cool. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's Slash Film Daily. You can find more of everything we mentioned in today's podcast on slashfilm.com and linked in the show notes. That includes that Lord of the Rings audiobook HT is listening to, the Good Omens review that she turned in, and Ben and Jacob's Game of Thrones review. And you can find this podcast, Slash Film Daily, published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And please rate and review this podcast at iTunes. Tell your friends. Spread the word. And we'll see you tomorrow. I mean, I won't see you tomorrow because I'll be traveling to a galaxy far, far down the 5 to Anaheim. But someone here will be seeing you tomorrow.
Hey, Peter.
Yes, Jacob?
I know Brad isn't here, but I do have the gargantuan book of insult, offense, and effrontery by Louis A. Safian here.
What chapter today, Jacob? What?
I have opened it up to the juvenile delinquents chapter.
I don't think anybody here is of that age.
Well, Peter, you'd be smarter if you smarted in the right places.
What?
Chris, that guy, he belongs to a gang of boys who are alike in many disrespects.
Yes. All right.
That HT, she has no respect for age unless it's bottled.
Oh, my.
And Ben, did you hear Ben joined a union? A teenage muggers union.
Gotta protect your rights.
I don't know. I don't know what to do with this, Jacob.
Well, I'll tell you what to do with it. You can be as tranquil as a Texas cyclone.
Does Louis A. Sapien have a book of comebacks that I can buy to read to your insults?
Louis A. Safian, a.k.a. the Master of Insult, is the author of 2,000 Insults for All Occasions, 2,000 More Insults, Jokes and Insults for Both Sexes, and Insults and Puns for Love and Marriage.
But no comebacks.
Let's see, I'm looking through the also available section. There is 5,000 side-splitting jokes and one-liners, There is The Snark Handbook, Insult Edition, Comebacks, Taunts, and Effronteries by Lawrence Dorfman. The Illustrated Dictionary.
Jacob,
Yes.
This is so elaborate. You can just say that you are Louis A. Sapien. All right? We know that you're writing all of this. You don't have to go through this elaborate
I mean, the
charade.
pen name is so fake anyway, Jacob. Just admit it.
Ben, the more I see of you, the worse I like you.
By the way, I hope that those side-splitting jokes are so side-splitting that they actually like spill all our organs and guts outside of the sides of our bodies.
Well, you wound up the cat, put out your wife, and got into bed with the clock.